presenter is going to be Quirk, who is talking about a guide to publishing for first-time authors.
All right.
Oh, and one more thing, please hold all questions till the end. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. For my undergraduate thesis, I did a creative project in which I'm writing a young adult science fiction novel. And so the written portion of it is a how-to manual on the publishing process, and that's what I'm going to take you through today. So first what we're going to talk about is the publishing methods and the advantages and the disadvantages of each method. Traditional publishing is where you go through a publishing house and they buy the rights and they're responsible for selling the work of the book. And direct publishing is where you do not go through a publishing house and you're responsible for the work yourself. Then we're going to be talking about imprints. Imprints are smaller publishing houses owned by the major big five publishing houses, and talking about how you can send unsolicited submissions through these imprints. Then we'll be talking about the components and the conventions of a successful submission packet. And young adult science fiction, and the specific imprints that you can send your young adult science fiction manuscripts to. This genre is very in demand, and it's increasing in popularity due to works such as The Hunger Games, The Maze Runner, and the Divergent series. And finally, we'll be talking about the implications and the success rates of these methods. So first I'm going to talk about traditional publishing and the major publishing houses. There's 5 major publishing houses: Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, Hachette, Macmillan, and Simon & Schuster. The advantages of these publishing houses is they have major distribution. So anything through these publishing houses will be found in every major bookstore and online, and will also have shelf life in the bookstores. They also have great resources in which the publishing house will edit and design the book for you, as well as promote it and be able to have book reviews for your book in popular publications, as well as reviewed by popular literary critics. And the disadvantage is that these are solicited submissions, which means that you have to go through a literary agent, which we'll talk about in a minute. The other traditional publishing method are small presses. These are regional publishers, which means that the disadvantage is that they're limited distribution because they're small publishing houses and they don't have nationwide distribution. However, they do take unsolicited submissions, which means you do not need a literary agent. And there's more one-on-one interaction because since they're small publishing houses, they only take a number of projects a year. For direct publishing, there's print on demand or POD publishing. This is also known as vanity publishing, in which you order physical copies of the book and then you sell them yourself. The advantages are these physical copies, and it's also the great method if you are targeting a niche market. This means that if you have family, friends, a market already within you, if you are a promotional speaker and you're going on tour, this is where you would have the physical books within you to be selling them. The disadvantage is that there's low profit margins, meaning these books are very expensive to print and then you have to sell them. However, as a first-time author, you have to also think about what you would be selling these books for, which means there's very tiny profit margins. And also, it is considered to hurt your credibility if you're using direct publishing for your first novel as a means of eventually traditionally publishing. This isn't going to help you because these aren't considered published books and they aren't taken seriously in the credential part of the query and cover letters. The other direct publishing method is electronic publishing, and this is most popular in Amazon Kindle and Barnes & Noble Book. They are advantageous because they're low cost, meaning that it doesn't cost anything to put the books out online, and they take small profit margin at a variable cost based on how many you sell. And if you sell under a certain line, like 99 cents, they don't take any profit margin at all. This is also very strong for building an audience, in which if you want to later traditionally publish, this is the perfect way to be able to have the statistics of how many downloads you get and what your audience is, so that later on a traditional publisher would want to invest in you. The disadvantage is that this is complete self-promotion, which means that you're your only resource, which means that editing, designing, promoting the book yourself, and then you wouldn't have the resources of having major advertisements or book reviews without incurring the cost. Next, we're going to be talking about the reasons for choosing a method, which are barriers of entry and the genre. So for traditional publishing, the barriers of entry is that they're very competitive. With these, the publishers have to want to invest in you. It's very costly. And so coming as a first-time author, it's very, very slim that you will be chosen. Also, another barrier is solicitation. This means that you have to be accepted by a literary agent, which means your first step is submitting to the literary agent, and then the literary agent would go and try and get the book published for you, and you would pay him a monthly fee, not guaranteed at all that the book would end up getting published. And once the book is published, you would pay him or her royalties in addition to the publishing house. The other one is credibility. As a first-time author, you don't have the credentials necessary, and that makes it much harder to be competitive. The genres in which are very strong to go for as a first-time author are fiction, juvenile fiction, and nonfiction. Mostly juvenile fiction and nonfiction because there is little to no target market for that in electronic publishing. So if you're a first-time author in these two genres, you definitely want to try and go the traditional route because the market just isn't there. For direct publishing, the barriers of entry are limited editing and limited promotion, so having a very quality work that you can put out and then having the audience for that, as well as a limited target market. So your target market is only those who consume electronic books, and that's obviously much smaller than those who consume physical books. The genres that are perfect for this are formulaic fiction. This means that people are able to write 25 to 100 books in a year. This is things such as mystery and romance, in which you change a few of the factors and you can keep pumping out novels. This is important if you want to go the electronic route because not only are you building an audience because you're constantly putting books out, but once you have that audience, they're constantly consuming your products that you're putting out, which means that if you're popular here, you don't even have to go the traditional route, and there's several people where they make this their full-time living is writing this formulaic. Then you go online. Self-help and adult and trade publications are also very advantageous online. Now we'll be talking about imprints. Imprints are smaller publishing houses owned by the Big Five. So an example of these, and they're very specialized, would be Celebra by Penguin Random House, which only publishes biographies from Latin celebrities. Squarefish is by Macmillan, and it only publishes juvenile fiction and children's books. And then Avon Impulse is by HarperCollins, and it's romance. These are fantastic because you get the national distribution of a major publishing house while still having the low barriers of entry and the high control that you would have with a small publishing press. Because technically they are a small publishing press in the sense of they only take a few projects in a year and they're very specialized, but because they're owned by the Big Five, you have the national distribution. Now we'll be talking about the components of a successful submission packet. The first one being writing samples that need to be written in standard manuscript format. This is one-sided pages, 1-inch margins, double-spaced text, Times New Roman size 12 font. These writing samples can vary anywhere from the first 10 to 50 pages of your manuscript to the first chapter, the first 5 chapters of your manuscript. Then we have the query letter. These will address the reader, and then the order that you'll have is you'll hook the reader with something interesting about your book, offer a 150-word summary, your own biography and credentials, and then you'll express your appreciation, and this is very narrative language. Typically, query letters are asked for with a small writing sample, and that you would only give the first 10 to 50 pages of your writing sample, and then you have the query letter, and they would decide if they want to go on and ask for the full manuscript. Cover letters have the same form, but it's very technical language because usually you're submitting these with your full manuscript. So you really want to focus on your credentials for them to decide if they want to invest in you or not. For young adult sci-fi, the two major imprints by Penguin are Dog Books and Ace Books. For Dog Books, you have to submit a 3-month exclusive submission, which means once you send your manuscript to Dog Books, you can't send it to anyone else for 3 months or until you hear back from them within that 3-month period. You will submit it to Peter Stanfill in the New York City office. It's an unbound full manuscript with the cover letter and a self-addressed envelope and postcard so that they can mail you back their decision. For Ace Books, you'll send a query letter and your 10-page writing samples and email this stuff. For Macmillan imprints for young adult science fiction, there's Tor. And you'll send a 3-chapter writing sample with your book synopsis, a dated cover letter, and the self-addressed envelope to the acquisitions editor of the science fiction and fantasy department. For FSG Originals, you will send it to the Farrar, Straus & Giroux New York City office, since it's a Macmillan publishing house, and then the Farrar, Straus & Giroux imprint, and then the FSG Original imprint. So this is very specialized, sending them a cover letter, a 50-page writing sample, and then your self-addressed envelope. So now I'm going to go over a study that was done by Diane Warrenberg, where she surveyed authors working on their first book. And what she found of those she surveyed that considered themselves authors was that 58% of them had actually completed the manuscript. 34 of them had started it but had never completed it, and 8% had never started the book. Of the 58% that actually completed their manuscript, only 9% never submitted it, and 15% of that 58 submitted it, and then 33% were published. That means over half of the people that completed their book ended up with a published product. And of that, 13% were traditionally published, 20% self-published. So usually as writers, we see that traditionally published books and going through a publishing house is such a far-off dream. And you see here, almost a quarter of everyone who finished their book and submitted it to a publishing house were traditionally published. and with the last being hybrids, which means that it could have been started as a direct published electronic format, and then the publishing house bought the rights to it, or it was taken on by a publishing house, but most of the promotional costs were incurred by the author. And that's it. And I guess we're doing questions at the end. So.